This review is for a mature rated game. Viewer discretion is advised. The Final Fantasy series, a series of JRPGs that date back to the late 80s, created mostly as a final game because of a developer's and/or company's uncertain future, only to successfully lead to many more games and create a legacy. It's a series that is hard to not know about almost no matter what games you play. It is also hard to ignore the constant debate over which Final Fantasy is the best. It is possible to consider the first Final Fantasy you play the best, considering the effect it has on you. After playing Chrono Trigger in 2012, I finally decided to give the Final Fantasy series a go. I started with Final Fantasy VI, also known as Final Fantasy III in the West. Suffice to say, it very quickly made a positive impression on me, least of all due to its sharing positive aspects from Chrono Trigger. But not long after starting to play it, I was tempted to try what is quite possibly one of the most, if not the most notable entries in the series, Final Fantasy VII. Originally released on the PlayStation in 1997, it joined other gaming series such as Mario and Zelda in the video game industry's transition from 2D to 3D. It also marked a shift in the popularity of JRPGs and how they were received in the West. But why is this? Why is it so highly regarded? What about the compilation of Final Fantasy VII? And more importantly, why is Final Fantasy VII essentially the only main entry of the series to get a remake? Well, there is no denying that the remake was highly anticipated. It was first unveiled at E3 in 2015 and seemingly delayed again and again, only to get some exciting trailers and gameplay demos in 2019 and 2020. The first part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake series was finally released on April 10th, 2020, and now it is time to actually compare the original and the remake, at least the first part of the series, in a series of detailed analysis videos that are, hopefully, quite worthy of the legendary status of the games themselves. I, Vidi of Video Games for Fun, hope you enjoy my multi-part review series of Final Fantasy VII. After the completion of Final Fantasy VI, producer Hironobu Sakaguchi and director Yoshinori Kitase set out to create the next installment. It was set to be a 2D entry for the Super Nintendo, just like its predecessor, but when work commenced on Chrono Trigger, that became a priority. Then what happened? Was it safe to stick with a 2D pixel art for the next Final Fantasy? Well, it was decided to take a risk. A 3D tech demo showing characters from Final Fantasy VI in a battle gave confidence to the developers that they could do 3D graphics. But the power required to run them effectively, not to mention the potential scale of the world and story, meant that the Final Fantasy series, and indeed other Square series or projects, jumped ship from Nintendo with the Nintendo 64 to Sony with the PlayStation. This can be considered startling in retrospect, as Square was essentially a Nintendo ally, with exclusive games such as Chrono Trigger, Super Mario RPG, and the Secret of Mana games. It seemed like the hardware with discs instead of cartridges and different approaches to third-party support were impossible to resist. Is it possible this move was just as risky as creating the first Final Fantasy game, a move which actually resulted in putting Square on the map? Could the series survive a potentially and heavily experimental and expensive transition from 2D to 3D? The only way to begin answering those questions is to boot up the game itself. The production values are the first thing that make for a positive impression. It's all in the introduction. The close-ups of Aerith's face, followed by her walking out of the alley into the streets of the city of Mika. The dolly camera movements that move away from that mysterious flower girl, showing the modern architecture, the vehicles and people busily moving around, and more importantly, the immense size of the city. The scene is also backed up by simple, ominous music that crescendos into a grand melody as the game's title flashes onto the screen. A nice piece of music by composer Nobuo Uematsu, whose contributions to this game will be analysed later in this video. While it may not necessarily look like much today, especially as technology has changed, this intro alone, especially with the camera movements, already gets the excitement going and makes this entry of the Final Fantasy series already different from its predecessors. It is just as nice to see this replicated to good effect in the remake. Further differences have to be noted, such as the city looking larger, which makes sense considering the setting of a remake, with more buildings and busy streets. And of course, the start of the intro is changed to show the rocky overworld outside Mecca, before showing the people, vehicles and streets, not to mention some dying plant life, and the credits. How detailed the remake's intro looks will be focused on shortly, but overall, in both games, the intro is amazing. The tone is set, the player is drawn in, and it makes a good impression. Whether that impression is sustained, well, we have to look at the graphics and sound some more. One of the most important aspects of the graphics in Final Fantasy VII is the scale. The intro already shows how big of a game this is going to be. The For starters, each location you explore is made of screens, each with a generally dynamic camera angle. A lot of the time, the main character of Cloud will be small on screen, showing just how big the world is, providing plenty of incentive to explore. Each screen scrolls accordingly, such as the moment where Jesse teaches Cloud, and you the player, to climb ladders. Characters also move closer or further away from the camera, a contrast from the previous Final Fantasy games that is more in line with being like a film. Even the bosses tend to be giant, and the summons are flashy. Overall, the use of polygonal models over pre-rendered backgrounds is mostly effective, and satisfies the intent for realism. There are many cutscenes throughout the game, and there are two types of them. One is the aforementioned combination of polygonal models over pre-rendered backgrounds, where the characters are generally closer to the camera and show more motion. The second one is the full motion video cutscenes that contain computer-generated imagery. They are simply impressive for their day, and given that Western artists who had worked on films such as Star Wars, Jurassic Park and Terminator 2 also helped out, it's hard to dismiss that. There's around 40 minutes of them, something that wouldn't have been possible on the Nintendo 64. These two kinds of graphics are often juxtaposed with each other, but that alone especially shows that the graphics have not aged well. While the achievement of not making the cutscenes massively more detailed than the models and backgrounds is commendable, the relative inconsistency is not good by today's standards. Even in battle, character models look more detailed, as highlighted by the, back then, unique sweeping camera moves. The pre-rendered backgrounds, while certainly poorly textured or blurry, are actually nice and add to the atmosphere, and are also consistent with the backgrounds in battle that change accordingly depending on the setting. Any flaws with the graphics are mostly easy to overlook when analysing the art direction, which can be mostly attributed to Yusuke Noura and character designer Tetsuya Nomura. Pay attention to that name for the remainder of this review series, it's important. Beyond the simple idea of realism is a sense of coolness and even quirkiness or weirdness. Relearning drawing in 3D over 2D and foregoing the chibi style of pixel art is what highlights the quality of the art direction, even if the spiky hair of characters like Cloud did mostly become the norm for games to come. The colours are nice, the characters are identifiable, and the mise-en-scene of the environments, such as the heavy use of the colour green in Midgar, make it hard not to be drawn into the world despite dated technical shortcomings. It even feels like there's a kind of charm to the characters and the way they show emotion in those PlayStation 1 graphics. Looking at the graphics of the remake, it is very simply a far more stunning and amazing take on the PlayStation 1 graphics. The fact that it was done from scratch is to be noted. The character models are extremely nice, with the slightest modifications to clothing and physique, surely to not be much of a bother to fans. Much like in the original, the city of Midgar is realised very well, especially due to the heavy uses of the colours green and blue. It looks very industrial, with the daytime scenes and more beautiful mise-en-scene, such as the garden outside Aerith's house being a breath of fresh air. The lighting is also exceptional, due to the use of the enlightened lighting engine, and the warm colours are positively vibrant. Absolutely lovely. That being said, while this game is a lot more than pleasing on the eyes, there are some faults which are mostly subjective. Some of the details and textures, especially with some of the locales and NPCs that are not as important as the main characters, are lacking in quality and noticeably glitch on occasion. And the art direction, while good, could have been somewhat more ambitious, rather than feeling like just making the original game again but more pretty. It is essentially a CGI anime, even with the character models. The visuals overall are amazing, cinematic in their presentation, and the game runs smoothly on the Unreal Engine 4, with any moments of slowdown barely detracting from the experience. The production teams at Square Enix have rarely if ever failed to deliver on the visuals. One of the best aspects of the game, if not the best, is quite possibly the soundtrack. With the original game, the soundtrack may be a MIDI, but is quite simply a masterpiece in the history of video game music. Composer Nobuo Uematsu set out to make the music more like a film, with individual mood pieces, and it shows. The leitmotifs, especially the character themes, are subtle, and the variety is impressive, ranging from the dark quiet undertones to the adrenaline-filled action sequences. Areas, such as Cosmo Canyon, have their own nice setting theme. And the main theme alone is not only nicely composed, but subtly woven throughout, from the crescendo in the intro to the overworld exploration. But the highlights are the emotional and beautiful music cues that accompany more of the game's memorable scenes. In one of the game's most notable story moments, The music goes on even while a boss battle occurs. It would have been so easy just to simply swap music tracks, but Uematsu surely knew that for the player to feel emotion and to feel incentive to keep on fighting the challenges in the game, the music had to linger. Also, Uematsu was also surprised to see how popular the final boss music One Winged Angel became, but since it integrates genres such as classical and rock combined with digitized vocals, it's easy to see why. That track, along with many tracks from the game, may have been overplayed, but make no mistake, it is hard to get this music out of your head or feel something, with the only minor problem being that the music looping can get really annoying sometimes when stayed in a certain place for too long. To be fair, it wouldn't be a Final Fantasy or game made by Square if the music wasn't that great. How the soundtrack is done in the remake is also wonderful, though probably not as impactful, least of all for having played the original first. For the most part, it consists of remixes of tunes from the original. The main theme, Aerith's theme, the battle theme, and of course One Winged Angel, and various other tracks are remixed numerous times to complement many scenes throughout the game. Say goodbye to MIDI and say hello to orchestration, with strings, brass and some electronic instrumentation to add to the dynamics. Just like in the original game, the tracks are subtly woven throughout and really add to the emotions, tensions and adrenaline. There are some really nice original tunes in there, including the quiet train graveyard. So then, why isn't the soundtrack as impactful as before? Is it just because the tunes are somewhat similar? Well, there are a few subjective factors or tastes. The use of orchestration does sometimes make for the music being generic, and the remixes of tunes that feature in moments or places outside of Midgar in the original, while they sound nice, are mostly just nostalgic reminders rather than a fitting piece that adds something. On Our Way being featured towards the beginning of the overall game, rather than the Town of Calm, is one example. Also, tunes of the game can be collected for a jukebox. Hearing Cosmo Canyon done more so in a rock and roll style, for example, may not please the fans, but one can only hope that it sounds just as fitting as it did in the original, if not better. The soundtrack was done more so by Masashi Hamutsu and Mitsutsu Suzuki, with Nobuo Uematsu contributing, at least, for the theme song. The nature of the compositions tends to suggest an experimental playfulness, as well as a sense of nostalgia and cinematic undertones. Overall, whichever release of Final Fantasy VII you look at, well, listen to, it is quite possibly one of the most brilliant and eclectic series of compositions put together for a video game. The production values alone show how the Final Fantasy series made such a leap. The original visuals, while dated, were great for their time and somehow have a charm to them when looked at today. Much of the music tracks easily become favourites, or at least get stuck in your head or make you feel emotion. Additionally, the sound effects in both versions are quite meaty and cool. Of course, there's voice acting in the remake, but it'll make more sense to talk about that in regards to the story. That will be analysed a lot in part 2 of the review series alongside the gameplay. Until then, have a good day or night or whatever it is, and don't leave Midgar just yet.